Hello, everybody. It's Chris here to taste some Rhône wine and talk about how well they work with the impending Thanksgiving meal that you'll all be enjoying, I'm sure, in some form or another.
Yes, perhaps with a different company, but hopefully you can still enjoy a nice meal.
Indeed, I think it's our duty to continue trying to celebrate in any way we can, even when times are hard. We got it?
I think we're good, yes.
All right.
There we go. All right. All thank you so much for joining us. And I'm sure you know us by now, Alicia and the wonderful Chris Speir, who I'm really thrilled is here today because as he alluded to, we're going to talk about Thanksgiving and we have 4 wonderful wines from the Rhône, specifically from Cotes du Rhone and Cotes du Rhone Village, that we're going to chat through the wines and really talk about kind of why they work and what elements of your kind of likely Thanksgiving meal here in a couple weeks kind of pair well. We're going to talk culinary techniques and kind of the food and wine interaction. But first, let's just kind of set the scene here as to where we are. And we've talked about the Rhône for a while, and you may be familiar, but just to center ourselves here in the south, kind of eastern part of France here. When we talk about Cotes du Rhone, though it can be grown anywhere, really in the Rhone Valley, we're largely in the southern Rhone. And you'll see that here on the map. You'll see the size of the southern Rhone. You have 16 times the plantings in the south than we do the north. But what connects these 2 regions is, of course, the Rhone River, which runs 505 miles from the Alps down to the Mediterranean, bringing with it this very strong Mistral wind, which I did see this, Chris, it can blow up to 60 miles per hour. And to give context, hurricanes, they classify those beginning at 70. So
yeah, you're approaching category 1 there.
A vicious wind. So they are worried in the vineyards, of course, about kind of stabilizing those vines, tying those up. But what it does do, following the wind, it brings in beautiful sunshine, a lot of dry air. It also, that heavy wind allows many producers in this part of the world to farm organically and biodynamically. That sunshine and that dryness and the wind kind of blowing away any pests and diseases is always helpful. So down here in the south, long kind of warm summers, really a beautiful place. And I actually have not been. Chris, have you been to the Southern Rhone at all?
Yeah, I have indeed, and it is absolutely beautiful. I would highly recommend it. The food is fantastic, the wines are great, and the scenery is lovely.
What we're going to, way to tease us, and hopefully in the future sometime we can get there. But today we're going to focus, if you look at kind of how the kind of regional kind of laws here are laid out and the appellation structure, we're going to look at that regional Cotes du Rhone that you see in the pyramid, the Cotes du Rhone Village, which these together make up 60% of all the wines produced in the Rhone, so the bulk of them. So we really want you to be familiar and comfortable shopping and tasting for these wines. We'll then get the luxury of tasting our last wine here is a Cotes du Rhone Village with an appended village name. And you'll see on the map here on the right-hand side, we have 21 of those. Chris, can you tell us about kind of how that system works?
Sure. So the Rhone in particular, but French wine in general, is kind of set up in a system where if you're in a certain geographical area, you can have aspirations to move up the AOC or AOP ladder, as they might now say. So in the Rhone, you have basic Cotes du Rhone, and that contains a lot of individual villages. And then you have Cotes du Rhone Village, which is also a collective of villages. But then there's a level where you can reach, if you lobby and present your case well, that you can append your name to Cotes du Rhone Village and actually have that appear on the label. So the appellation is still basically Cotes du Rhone village, but you get to trumpet your village or commune name on the label. And then if you continue to do well, there's no reason you couldn't move up and become an AOC, a cru proper, with time. And many villages have done this, like Gigondas got elevated to AOC in maybe 73, and on and on. And the one we're going to taste today is very recent. Just became a commune appended Cotes du Rhone village in 2016. And we're in fact tasting the 2016 vintage. So this will be the first time, I believe, they'll have that on the label.
So their debut wine, and as Chris mentioned, you present your case here, but you're communicating that you have a kind of a specific terroir that maybe is a little bit more unique to that village, to that commune that sets you apart. So we'll get into all that when we get to the last wine. But let's start tasting, Chris, and let's start talking Thanksgiving. I think I mentioned this to you earlier. I actually went to the store and purchased kind of a traditional Thanksgiving dinner and had this for lunch today and had all the wines. And so I'm going to chime in with my thoughts too, as you share your more expert culinary opinions. But
well, I don't know if they're more expert, but I mean, you took a very scientific approach here. I'm just relying on years of gluttony to opinion.
So let's start with the Famille Perrin Cotes du Rhone Blanc Reserve here. All stainless steel, so we should get a really kind of clean wine that is based largely on Grenache Blanc, but they blended Marsanne, Roussanne, and Viognier. And whites of the Rhone are really special. They're only about 7% of total production. So if you have not had one, I understand kind of why it's a small bit of production, but I would encourage you to seek it out. And it's texturally going to be quite different than a lot of your kind of linear, high acid, kind of these like leaner styles, rounder, weightier wines coming from the Rhone.
Yeah, no doubt. Just on first opinion here, the nose is very fresh and lightly floral, and I really like it. But as you say, when you get into tasting it, there's a bit of a roundness and a textural appeal to the wine that I think is being delivered by perhaps the Marsanne in the blend gives you a little oilier or waxier texture. And the Grenache Blanc is keeping it very, very lively, in my opinion. And then those kind of floral top notes, and it's also got a lot of kind of peachy apricot thing going on. I think Viognier is informing that pretty heavily. Not to break it down too much, but it's a pretty layered wine at this price point, and very refreshing, while still having some weight and texture to it.
I completely agree. And what you'll notice as well, definitely that oily texture, you're right, that's coming from the Marsanne, plurality, especially from the Viognier. But all of these kind of white grape varieties that we're talking about in this blend generally are pretty high in alcohol. So that's also lending itself to that weight you feel in your mouth. And as you think about kind of Thanksgiving, if you're anything like my husband, who actually just does not enjoy turkey at all, and maybe it's just you and your significant other or a friend, and it might be smaller than usual, and you might say, yeah, I don't have to do kind of a full traditional meal. If you are someone that might kind of gravitate towards a lighter fare, especially in kind of the fish and shellfish space, this is actually a perfect wine for you to go ahead and pick up.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think this year is going to be very different for most people, and not everybody is going to be roasting a turkey, but they still want to have something nice on the table. So, I mean, it could be anything from a small game hen stuffed with wild rice, or a whole roasted fish, or whatever it may be. This is certainly there to handle the lighter foods. But I also think if you're having a traditional meal, there are a couple of things that might work particularly well with this. One thing that distinguishes different family tradition or regional traditions of Thanksgiving is the stuffing or the dressing. So there are a bunch of different kinds. And when I tasted this, my first thought immediately was kind of the either East Coast or Southern penchant for making cornbread stuffing. So I think that kind of slightly sweet, corny flavor would work really well with this wine. And I also think that if you're going to put some oysters in it, like some people are want to do, this is the wine for you among these four. It's definitely a seafood or light poultry wine, and that briny oyster with that slightly sweet corn paired with the bright acidity and the richer stone fruits in this wine, I think would work pretty well. And I also think I don't know, you probably tried this today. How did it go with some buttery mashed potatoes?
So the mashed potatoes actually today were kind of a winner with all of the wines we're about to have. They really kind of, so I had garlic, very kind of garlicky, buttery mashed potatoes. And they almost just act as a vehicle to kind of carry along, the flavors that are in the wine. Why I think it's kind of special with this one in particular is because of the weight and texture of the mashed potatoes, how it aligns itself well with this wine that texturally can kind of hold up to that and not just kind of get covered by those potatoes. So yeah, I think the potatoes for sure would be great. And yeah, the stuffing I had was actually a little bit spicy, which I would be a little bit cautious of. But if it's not spicy, especially if it's heavy on those herbs, I do think there's some kind of herbal kind of notes to this wine that would pair very well.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're going to find across the board here that herbal preparations, are going to work really well with these. In almost any iteration of stuffing, you're going to find, sage and thyme and things like that. And these wines are meant for pairing with stuff like that. So I think that it makes a lot of sense. And I did anticipate that this was going to work with the mashed potatoes pretty well. So yeah, that's nice. And also, if you're starting your meal, we have some more full-bodied wines later. This could be your welcome glass, or if you have any appetizers, you have some boiled shrimp set out or something. This is going to work perfectly to introduce people to the evening.
Yeah. And the wonderful part with, the wonderful part of these wines is, which we'll show the price points at the end, but they're all under $20. And so it means you can actually course your meal with the wine pairings, and you don't need to kind of commit to just one wine. You can switch it up and have a fun, diverse night.
That's the way I like to do it. One final thought, not everybody is into courses in their Thanksgiving meal. It's often family style, but if you do indeed do salads or soups or anything, I think this would probably work with a not too sweet butternut squash soup or pumpkin soup. I think that could be quite nice.
Yeah. The only thing to warn or to caution you rather on the wine is the acidity is kind of medium, I would say, at best. And so you would want to avoid pairing it with something incredibly high in acid. Your wine needs to kind of match or exceed the level of acid in your food. So it'll just, if your food's too acidic alongside a wine that isn't as kind of high in acid as this one isn't, but the wine will taste kind of flabby and lose a little bit of its brilliance. So just
speaking of which, Alicia, did you happen to have any cranberry sauce? Because that's always the curveball. They're kind of, tart and tannic and can be a challenge for wine. Did you try that out?
I can't say I did.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Not on offer where I went, but yeah. If anyone watching right now thinks they want to venture a guess on cranberry sauce and what wine they would pair with it, we'd love to hear from you or any questions in the Q&A function of the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Please ask questions if you have any about if you're making something in particular and you want to know what we think would work out with it. That would be great.
Yes. But let's move on. So that was our white wine of the day here. Now we're going to go to a rosé, and this is from Etienne Guigal. Guigal's been making rosé since the 40s, actually. So a long reputation here of quality rosés. Excuse me, this is 70% Grenache, 20% Cinsault, and 10% Syrah. And real quick, Chris, and just to get a little bit nerdy here, but the average yield for this wine is 35 hectoliters per hectare, which is incredibly low. I was very surprised to see that. And so when we have lower yields in the vineyard, of course, more kind of flavor concentration and energy and nutrients are directed to those individual berries, and thus a better wine, so most of the time. So really great quality here from Guigal.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. This rosé is always one that displays elegance, but there's also a sense of power to it, which I think because of those low yields, you get that sense, and it makes it the perfect choice for a meal with a lot of disparate flavors and some relatively aggressive flavors. This is like your Swiss Army knife of wines for Thanksgiving. I think you could go anywhere from dark meat turkey to almost anything on the table with this, personally.
Yes. It was, of all the wines that I had, it was the one that it was kind of inoffensive with everything. And I mean that in the best of ways, that Thanksgiving is so challenging. As Chris said, there are so many textures, there are so many flavors, there's bitterness, there's sweetness, there's savory, it's all there. And this rosé held its own with all those flavors. So really lovely wine, and just, yes, power, but still this finesse, tons of layered breadfruit on the nose, refreshing acidity, but a nice kind of solid medium-bodied wine.
Yeah, not to harp on the dressing too much, but I think this wine, there's definitely an herbal, just a hint of herbal bitterness on the finish. I think that would be fantastic with a very herby bread stuffing. Or I think it would also be quite nice with maybe a wild rice-based stuffing. I think that would work really quite well. But like I said, that you're going to be hard pressed, to find anything that really clashes with this wine in the meal. So it's the all-purpose wine tonight, and it's delicious.
Yeah, we keep kind of talking about this herbal element in the wines, and in the Rhône they refer to it as this garrigue, and it's that kind of sage, thyme, rosemary, but alongside it's this kind of juniper note as well, that's often found in the Rhône, and especially in the south, also over in Provence. So when you have Rhône wines, white all the way through to red, see if you can kind of find it. It normally appears, and thus anytime you're having food and you can accentuate and add those herbs into the dish, or if they're already there, you're probably gonna have a good pairing.
Yeah, you don't always want to match things like that, but I think in this case, it's the way to go. A lot of times contrast is a really striking pairing, but when it comes to the herbaceousness of Rhône wines, herbs are very much your friend in cooking. And I would stress, if you can, splurge on fresh herbs. It's worth it.
Yes. Yeah. Ingredients, just like the quality of the grapes and the wines, you need good ingredients in the kitchen as well.
Indeed.
So let's get to the reds, which when I was having lunch today, were definitely the most, I thought they were the most exciting in terms of the interaction was a little more kind of defined. I can point to kind of why exactly it worked, with certain components. And I definitely have a favorite as well, not just as a wine, but just as a pairing. And I'll share that. But the first wine we're going to have is from Domaine Grand Vigneur, their Cotes du Rhône Les Champs-Vents 2017. The Jaune family, of course, has been making wine since the early 1800s, I think 1826, in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And so Alain Jaune, now the 5th generation, has been running it since the 70s, and now with his children. But what's really cool about this wine, we get great value, and it's Cotes du Rhône, but it's located just outside the Châteauneuf-du-Pape boundaries. And so it's kind of a fraction of the price for just an absolutely gorgeous wine, just, a few meters from the line there.
Yeah, quite literally a few meters. This is a a great Chateauneuf du Pape producer, in my opinion. They're incredible. And this vineyard is very large. It's a large piece of land, and it's right on the northern border. Literally, you could probably, if you were relatively tall, lay down and have your toes in Chateauneuf du Pape and your fingers in Cotes du Rhone. That's how close it is. And you know, they're not the only ones like that. People famously talk about Chateau Beaucastel and Coudelet du Beaucastel. The Coudelet vineyard is essentially right adjacent to this one too, and right outside of the what ended up being drawn as Chateauneuf du Pape back in the 30s. But the terroir is relatively similar, and they definitely make this wine in a bold style that could be mistaken for Chateauneuf for sure. The quality is such that you can definitely be fooled.
Yeah, this is 70% Grenache, 20% Syrah, 10% Mourvedre. So the Grenache is largely giving us these red fruits, but as Chris mentioned, they're making it in a bolder style. So we're in the kind of the deep brambly versions of the red fruits, not the kind of bright strawberries. We're in the black raspberry, black cherry, kind of the muddled dark red fruits. And the tannins as well, I want to highlight, are pretty fine grained. And when we say that, it means they're not super like coarse and kind of sheeting in your mouth, but defined, and they're very pleasant, but they're there, solidly there. And so we're getting great structure to the wine for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. The tannins make themselves known for sure, but you're right. They're absolutely very, very fine, and I would say very refined, very, very gentle, caressing tannins. Really well done, in my opinion. And really, you know, the Rhône has had a string of pretty hot vintages. So I think this has great retention of pretty decent natural acidity too.
Very much so. And even despite the warm vintages, and especially because remember in the Southern Rhône, we get a lot of those like stony pebbles. Those absorb heat during the day, they radiate it up to the vine at night. So it's kind of adding to those kind of warm temperatures, if you will, in terms of the ripening of the grapes. But they've definitely chosen to like pick the fruit at the right time. The fruit's not overripe by any means. And yeah, the acid is still nice and elevated. They're doing the Grenache and Concrete, and then the Syrah and the Mourvedre in these kind of really old barrels. So similar to what we see in the Rhône, a very kind of delicate, very restrained use of oak. It doesn't dominate the wine in any way at all.
Absolutely true. Yeah, this is all of the vessels are neutral here, clearly. But you know, aging in neutral oak does give you a difference, you know, because oak is breathable and more so than concrete, obviously, and you get that oxygen exchange, and the wines tend to get a little fatter. But I think it's quite well done. It has beautiful balance. So
this, looking at my notes here from earlier, but this was my kind of 10 out of 10 for Turkey. So of all the wines, and we'll get to the next one, which was also great, I gave it a 9 out of 10 for Turkey, but this was my absolute favorite. It was also brilliant with the stuffing. It had enough kind of fruit, because I mentioned my stuffing even had a little bit of spice to it. This has enough fruit to kind of compensate for that. But all those herbal notes that we were talking about. And then it still did pretty well with the bitter greens, with the Brussels sprouts, I had some kind of sauteed spinach and that, which they're very, very tricky. Bitterness in food kind of mutes and kind of reduces the perception of the fruit in the wine. And so it can produce an unpleasant kind of reaction, but this wine kind of held its own. It wasn't magical, but it worked.
Yeah, I think the vegetables and the root vegetable components in this meal, less particularly sweet potatoes, are some of the hardest things to deal with. You know, if you're looking at a very sweet preparation of sweet potato, you might want to think about a sweet wine to go with it. These are going to run into a little bit of trouble up against that. Yeah. But the veggies, you know, a lot of times neutral is the best you can hope for in that pairing. Yeah. And I'm sure this handles it well. My thinking here is definitely the turkey, as you said, particularly some succulent thigh meat. But I would also say, in regards to the stuffing, yes, an herbal bread stuffing, but this is where you might, if you're inclined to put like meat or sausage into your stuffing, this is where your wine's going to help you out a lot. This will be great with sausage stuffing, or even a chestnut stuffing. You know, this might be a little esoteric for our audience, but turkey is actually quite popular for the holidays in France, and chestnuts are also beloved, and they go together there too. Obviously, there's no Thanksgiving, but on Christmas, you know, you might have a dinde farcie with a chestnut stuffing, or maybe glazed chestnuts on the side. And I think a wine like this would work very nicely with that. So if you're inclined that way with your stuffing. Also, you know, oftentimes you see mushrooms alongside chestnuts. And yeah, I think that would be an excellent umami-driven ingredient that would work with these reds too.
So what would you, I love all those suggestions, and I hope they're helpful for everyone watching, but you know, when we're talking about these greens and the veggies on the side, kind of, you know, one thing that comes to mind in terms of how to make these more wine friendly, you know, if you have it with your wine and it's not a good interaction, you know, salt and acid are kind of what comes to my mind in terms of what you can do to the dish to make it more wine friendly. But any tips, Chris, in terms of just preparation or other ingredients to add to the vegetables and other bitter greens to make that pairing better?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely on the right track. You kind of need to build bridges between the wine and the actual vegetable. So yeah, salt and acid. So if you have a relatively high acid wine, salt is great. A little bit of acidity, like a spritz of lemon juice or some kind of dressing, will help with high acid wines. But you could also, you know, if you're roasting Brussels sprouts or something like that, if you add a little smoky meat in there, little pieces of bacon or something, again, to ramp up that kind of savory, smoky umami flavor, that also can build a bridge to the red wines for sure. Yeah, there are a lot of approaches you can take. You know, I don't know how frequently people do this, but you know, there's a classic green bean casserole that a lot of people make. That kind of creamy mushroom sauce helps a lot because again, you're introducing that savory mushroom flavor and fatty, creamy, protein-laden sauce on there, and that will also build a bridge to these wines. If you're inclined to do something a little more southern, like green beans with stewed tomatoes or something, those tomatoes, again, are going to provide umami and acid to build a bridge. And tomatoes, because of their slight tartness, love salt. So again, you're going to hit them with a fair amount of salt, and that's going to build that bridge to the red wines for sure.
Yeah.
Those are just a few ideas.
Great ideas, and I love how you put it. Build the bridge, connect the food to the wine, and you know, play around. Maybe now is the holiday that you can, you know, kind of not worry too much about perfection, but experiment a little bit in the kitchen because, you know, you maybe have a little more time to do it. And the best way to kind of figure these things out is to just kind of practice these interactions and taste these things in your house. And ultimately, while we're sharing kind of general guidelines as to what works, it's all about your palate. Jesse Lang, a producer in the Willamette Valley, told me, your palate, your party. So
yes. Couldn't agree with that more.
You recorded. We did that podcast together.
We did indeed, and that is a great statement. I have to say, it makes so much sense to me.
Chris, would you like to introduce our last wine of the night here?
Surely. So
there we go.
I'm so terrible at this. My mind doesn't work that way. So this is Domaine L'Affiant. This is their Tres Cépages, which simply means 3 different grapes. Cuvée Tres Cépages, or Trois, sorry, I'm speaking in several languages right now. Trois Cépages. And this is the wine we were speaking about that in the fall of 2016, the area where these grapes come from was elevated from basic Cotes du Rhone village up to Cotes du Rhone village Sainte-Cécile. So this is a relatively new commune that is allowed to put their name on it. Now, if you happen to have an older bottle of this in your cellar, because they've been making this for quite a while, it'll just be Cotes du Rhone village. But from now on, and I was actually surprised to see it. We had a little discussion about this earlier today. I was aware of this, but I think they were elevated in November of 2016 after the harvest, but I guess 16 was included in being allowed to use that name. So interesting. And of course, what are the Trois Cépages? Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre,
Yep.
As you would expect.
Yes, and in pretty much equal parts as well is what they're doing here, and all concrete maturation. I kind of think of this wine as just kind of the last one, a little bit more on steroids. The color is much deeper, so we get a denser color concentration, has more of a purple, definitely a purple hue to it. And we get more black fruit here. In the last one, we had Grenache as our dominant blend, which you mentioned kind of really brings red fruit. Grenache brings high alcohol as well. But here, because we've increased the proportions of Syrah and Mourvèdre, in come kind of more black fruit on the palate. I also think there's kind of this licorice, kind of earthy note going on too, and then lots of those garrigue spices that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I agree. One interesting thing that this producer does that accentuates the richness in this wine is not just that high proportion of Mourvèdre and Syrah, which of course do that, bring a lot of color, a lot of structure, but his goal here is to harvest and co-ferment all of these grapes at the same time. And if you're like a Ridge Zin fan, you might understand the concept of field blending and co-fermenting things. But what this does is he's waiting on the Mourvèdre to ripen because it's a late ripener. It has a lot of anthocyanins, but he lets the Syrah and the Grenache hang until he thinks the Mourvèdre's right. So it's a very ripe, deep wine, and it has lots and lots of savory elements in the nose. I haven't even tasted it yet, and I think you're spot on. There's licorice and lots of deep flavors. I get almost like a sense of molasses or brown sugar in it, almost like an umami-driven, like imagine like a teriyaki beef, kind of meaty and savory at the same time.
Very much.
Yeah. I think I need to taste it.
And while you taste, I will share when I had this earlier with a number of the foods that I had. And by the way, I had the greens that I was talking about, and the turkey and the stuffing. I had macaroni and cheese as well. Weak spot. But what happens when we get to kind of this level of ripeness, as Chris was talking about, in terms of leaving the fruit on the vine, the tannins as well, elevated with the skin contact that's going on, it tends to, and it can overpower some of the more delicate kind of flavors that we have. And the delicate flavors on the plate being kind of that macaroni and cheese, being the mashed potatoes, and in a way, can be the turkey too, depending on kind of your gravy preparation and such. So, my recommendation actually for this wine is kind of, as we started tonight, sharing for those that might go for a darker meat or go for duck or other game, or even kind of a tenderloin or something like that. That's where this wine, I think, would serve you well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is a powerhouse of a Cotes du Rhone village. I mean, there's no doubt about it. This is not a shy wine. It's big, it's bold, it's ripe. And it's done well. It still has good balance, and it's not lacking in acidity. You know, it didn't suffer, the acid levels didn't suffer from hanging on the vine. 2016 was a fantastic year, of course, in the Rhone too. So that didn't hurt. But yeah, I mean, this is a big one. And I think you're right. You definitely, with the turkey, you've got to go dark meat and a very, very, hopefully you have a deeply flavored savory gravy to go with it. That's where this is gonna shine. But I also couldn't agree more that all of you who are considering alternative meals to turkey this year, if you're looking at duck, I think is a fantastic call here, especially if you do something really classic like duck with cherry or some other kind of fruit. I think that's really an excellent idea. And certainly, I mean, this wine will stand up to beef, lamb, whatever you throw at it. There's just no two ways about it. Even I would say, you know, this is a weird free association I'm going to do right here, but it kind of involves the last one and this one. So Grand Veneur is means basically the hunt master, and this was an actual position in the Maison d'Oie back in the ancient regime, where this guy was charged with taking care of the hounds for the royal hunts. And there is this is convoluted, but there's a French sauce that is quite excellent that will work with wild game particularly well. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because it involves peppercorns and red currant, which is a very common fruit to serve with game or to go into a sauce. And red currants to me have a very similar profile to some extent to cranberries. Mm-hmm. So this creamy red currant sauce, you could even do a variation with cranberries if you wanted to, and make your own Grand Veneur sauce. And it's fantastic with venison. But it also works with other meats. So I know that was a weird turn of the corner, but you know, that this is the kind of flavor profile that from the wine that's going to need something with bold expression, peppercorn, herbs, even those assertive fruit flavors that you'd get from cranberry or red currant. As long as they're not too sweet, will work nicely here.
Yeah. Chris, every time we do this, I'm amazed at the wealth of knowledge and very random facts that you have. That
I do have a mind that tends to wander, so.
No,
I'm a free association guy.
I love it, and I think it's a very helpful tip for those watching. So just to kind of wrap up here, I am going to throw all the wines on the screen one more time and just, you know, finish. And I'll just share, you know, in terms of kind of this traditional Thanksgiving meal, your kind of go with everything, safe bet. We talked about the rosé, and then I think my favorite, in terms of especially with the turkey pairing and kind of the traditional sides, was that Grand Veneur, that Cotes du Rhone, that third one we had there that you see on the screen. Chris, any favorites? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I hate to say the same thing, but you know, in the absence of tasting it with food, I think that has the perfect balance for this meal. It's just dialed in just right for a lot of the things that are going to be on your plate. But again, I think all of these would be nice options depending on how your meal skews. You know, if it's focused on lighter dishes or richer, you know, more traditional, very rich dishes. You know, you can go a lot of different ways, but don't forget those herbs. And again, I would also just point out the rosé is like, you know, it'll handle anything practically.
Yes. Yes. Well, Chris, thank you so much. Always a pleasure tasting and chatting. And
the pleasure is mine, Alicia.
Thank you all for tuning in. We wish you a very safe and happy Thanksgiving. And please go ahead and check out these great Cotes du Rhone and Cotes du Rhone Village wines. Have a good night, everyone.
Cheers. Enjoy your holiday.
Cheers.